It started with a chair. Just a chair. But in families like mine, furniture says more than words ever could. "We've put you on the patio, Logan," my mother said, smoothing the imaginary wrinkle in her silk blouse like the phrase hadn't just cut through my chest. She didn't meet my eyes. She never really did when it came to decisions like this. I followed her gaze through the tall French doors of the Sterling Country Club, the glass catching the flicker of golden lights and white linen like something out of a designer catalog. Inside, the tables were set with polished silver, place cards etched in calligraphy, champagne flutes glittering like trophies. I spotted my siblings, Bryce already holding court, Elise air-kissing someone's cheek, Delilah lounging in a couture gown like she owned the damn building. "The patio?" I asked, not with protest, just clarity. Because surely I hadn't heard right. But I had. Mom smiled like she was doing me a favor. "It's more relaxed out there. You always like the quiet." She said it with a tilt of her head, as if she was honoring some long-forgotten request. I almost laughed. I almost asked if being sent outside like a dog was a new tradition for Dad's 70th. Instead, I nodded. Just nodded. That was the role I'd learned to play. The agreeable outsider. The ghost with a pulse. I didn't argue. I never did. The moment I stepped onto the stone patio, the chill of the evening air bit through my charcoal jacket. No heat lamps. Of course not. My chair wobbled slightly, the back leg uneven on the slate tiles. The view was nice, I'll give them that. A manicured lawn, hedge-lined walkways, and further out, the rolling darkness of the golf course, dotted with white pin flags and fading twilight. But it wasn't the view they gave me. It was the message. I sat down at the small table they'd stuck in the corner, away from the glass doors, like an afterthought. My name card, written in a plainer font than the rest, tipped sideways in the wind. I flicked it upright and glanced back inside. That's when I caught Delilah's smirk. She was leaned in close to Elise, probably whispering something cutting, something meant to sting just enough. And then she turned, met my gaze, and let her lips curve in that way only someone deeply smug could manage. She lifted her champagne flute in a mock toast and mouthed, "The patio is for failures." There it was. The confirmation. The exile wasn't subtle, it was strategic. Designed to make a statement without making a scene. I nodded. Just once. Let them believe it. Let them sip their overpriced champagne and toast each other's hollow achievements while they imagined I'd faded into the background, still doing something with computers, still the awkward brother in their designer-tinted lives. They had no idea. I pulled my phone from my pocket and glanced at the screen, the soft blue light more comforting than any candle glow. Notifications stacked up like bricks. 12 missed calls from my CTO, 3 urgent texts from my board chair, 2 emails flagged with red exclamation points. I tapped open the most recent message. Subject, emergency board meeting. CEO required. My thumb hovered. I scrolled. Acquisition in motion. Competitive offer submitted by Eastbridge Group. Phoenix must respond. I smiled to myself as small and sharp. Phoenix Tech Group. My company. My little computer thing, as Bryce once called it with a yawn. The thing I built from the ground up while they toasted real estate deals and posed for lifestyle magazines. The thing I poured every sleepless night, every missed holiday, every ounce of silence into. The thing none of them bothered to ask about because they thought tech was a hobby and that power only came with loud suits and louder conversations. My phone buzzed again. A new message from Kara, my CTO. Phoenix meeting is go. They want you on the line in 30. Should we scramble the heli? I read it twice, the grin tugging at my mouth before I could stop it. Scramble the heli. We had that protocol in place for emergencies only, market shifts, high-stakes board votes, billion-dollar decisions that couldn't wait for traffic. Tonight qualified. Just barely. I typed back quickly. Yes. Tell James to prep the package. I'll be wheels up in 20. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and exhaled slowly, the breath fogging slightly in the cool air. I didn't look back through the French doors. I didn't need to. I could already picture the scene. Bryce grinning like a senator. Elise gliding between tables like a duchess. Delilah waiting for her moment to strike with just the right insult about someone's dress or divorce or DUI. But none of them had any idea what was coming. The waiter approached, balancing a tray of sparkling water and hors d'oeuvres. He hesitated when he saw me, alone, off to the side, forgotten. "Would you like a drink, sir?" he asked. I nodded. "Water's fine." He placed the glass down gently and gave me a polite smile, the kind reserved for outliers and overlooked guests. As he turned to leave, I spoke. Next time, don't bother with the patio. It's going to be repurposed. He blinked, clearly confused, but nodded and walked off. I took a sip. Crisp. Clean. Bottled under the private label my startup had acquired last quarter. Sterling H2O, the house water of this very club. They drank it, toasted with it, poured it freely, and I owned the distribution rights. I leaned back in the wobbling chair and looked out over the dark lawn, the faint hum of traffic in the distance, the quiet before impact. Let them toast inside. Let them believe their version of the world for a little longer. Let them forget about the boy on the patio. Because tonight, that boy was about to become their reckoning. And the sound of rotors in the distance? That was just the beginning. They like to pretend I'm not there. Not in an overly cruel way. Nothing you could put in a quote or accuse anyone of. No. My family's specialty was omission dressed in politeness. The kind of silence that hums beneath laughter, that slicks over conversations like a thin layer of oil. You don't see it until you slip on it. I've been slipping since I was 16. Bryce, the golden boy, had always filled the room with noise. He didn't just walk into spaces, he arrived. Loudly. With a fresh deal in his back pocket and a designer belt tied around his overhyped ego. People gravitated toward him, maybe because he made them feel like proximity to him was the same as success. He had the jawline, the connections, the laugh that came a half-second too late but always landed. And then there was Elise, elegant, curated, dripping in careful refinement. She married into wealth like it was a corporate strategy. Her husband, Graham, was born into a hedge fund empire and spoke as if every syllable was billed by the hour. Together, they were a headline in motion. Me? I was the one they introduced with a shrug. Logan? He's doing something in tech. The tone always landed somewhere between confusion and apology. A vague rumor floating through every party, every brunch, every fundraiser my mother organized with military precision. No one ever asked follow-up questions. They just nodded politely and pivoted to whatever Bryce had done that week or what designer Elise wore at her last charity gala. And tonight was no different. Through the glass doors, I could see Mom leaning against the bar, a flute of something bubbly in hand, laughing too loud at something Bryce said. Probably one of his canned stories, the kind where he made himself the hero with just enough humility sprinkled in to sound likable. Her hand rested on his arm, her smile stretched too wide. Bryce just closed a $20 million land deal, she said proudly to a passing guest. Oh, and Elise is hosting the mayor next week at her estate. Isn't that lovely? Then her voice dropped slightly as if she were ticking off a grocery list and just remembered the milk. Still doing your little computer thing, Logan? She asked me, barely glancing in my direction. I was standing only a few feet away, yet I felt like I was across an ocean. I nodded and gave her a small, polite smile, the kind I had perfected over the years. She didn't wait for a reply. Her eyes had already drifted back to Bryce, glowing under the lights. I stepped back outside, letting the patio door close behind me with a soft click. The air was colder now, but it felt better than the heat of that room. There, every breath felt like it cost me something. Out here, at least I could own my silence. I pulled out my phone again. A fresh set of texts waited at the top of the screen. Kara, CTO Phoenix meeting is go. They want you on the line in 30. Should we scramble the heli? I stared at the message for a beat longer than I should have. There was something poetic in it, something perfectly timed. They were in there pretending I didn't exist, and meanwhile, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition sat in motion because of me. Because of my little computer thing. My thumb hovered for a moment before typing. Yes. Green-lighted. I'll be airborne in 20. Send James. Full protocol. I locked the screen and slipped the phone into my pocket, feeling the vibration of another message before it even disappeared. The kind of urgency that had become my heartbeat over the last few years. I didn't wear it on my sleeve. I didn't advertise it with cufflinks or cologne. I built my success in silence, and it had grown teeth. The funny thing about being the ghost in a family like mine? You learn to haunt the edges. You observe. You take notes. You don't compete with the noise, they can have that. You become the shadow. And eventually you realize something important. Shadows stretch further than spotlights. I remembered when I was 16, tinkering with a broken laptop in the garage while Dad yelled at the TV during one of Bryce's football games. I'd rebuilt the motherboard using spare parts once scavenged online. Ran code through it that let me track packet loss across networks. That little experiment evolved into a diagnostic algorithm that caught the attention of a mid-tier VC firm 5 years later. They offered me $50 grand for a prototype. I turned it down and instead used their offer as leverage to launch Phoenix Tech. They never knew. Not Mom. Not Dad. Not even Elise. Bryce had asked once, drunk on vacation in Tulum, if I was still doing that startup thing. I told him I was dabbling. He grinned, patted me on the shoulder, and said, "You'll get there, buddy." I already had. But I didn't correct him. Why should I? They wanted me small. I let them have that illusion. It made the contrast more satisfying. I stared across the golf course now, the horizon fading into darkness. A breeze shifted the trees, rustling like dry laughter. Somewhere behind me, I heard a glass clink too loudly against another, probably Bryce again, announcing something meaningless. I didn't need a spotlight. I had a launch pad. A new message lit up my screen. James, 10 out. Perimeter secure. SUV ready at back entrance. I didn't smile this time. I just straightened my coat and tapped the screen once to confirm. Inside, they were still living in the illusion that I was optional. Outside, I was orchestrating a takeover that would alter 4 companies' futures and cement Phoenix's place in the AI race. Let them drink their champagne. Let them toast Bryce's land deals and Elise's dinner parties. Let them whisper about the ghost brother with the vague tech job. Soon, very soon, they would have no choice but to learn my name. And not because I'd announced it, but because the world would. Inside, everything glowed. The lights were that warm, syrupy gold you only find in country clubs and high-end restaurants. Expensive lighting made to flatter the already flattered. The chandeliers dangled like frozen fire, casting halos on everyone deemed important enough to be under them. I watched through the glass doors, my reflection faint but familiar. I didn't move to open them, just observed. The kind of observation you get good at when you're the afterthought in a family full of performers. Bryce stood in the center, holding a glass aloft like he'd just signed the Constitution. Legacy, he said, pausing dramatically, letting the word hang there like smoke. It's not just what we leave behind. It's what we build while we're here. The crowd murmured its approval. Elise beamed, practically floating in her floor-length emerald gown. Delilah leaned back in her chair, mouthing something under her breath to the woman beside her. Probably another jab about underachievers and plus ones that didn't shine quite enough. My chair creaked slightly beneath me on the patio stone, one of the legs catching the edge of a loose tile. I adjusted, steadying myself. I remembered what Mom had said earlier when I asked why I was being seated out here. "We just didn't want you to feel out of place, darling." She'd adjusted my water glass like she was fluffing a throw pillow, as if that made it all fine. Out of place. That phrase rolled around in my mind like a marble. Not rejected. Not disinvited. Just placed elsewhere. Like clutter they didn't want to throw away, but didn't want ruining the photo either. I glanced down at the table in front of me. Simple setting. A plate I wouldn't use. A napkin folded too precisely. And that water glass, clear, cold, sweating slightly under the chill of the air. I lifted it and took a slow sip, not because I was thirsty, but because it gave me a reason to hold something. A reason to stay calm. What they didn't know, the poetic little joke no one here would ever appreciate, was that I owned the damn water. The label on the bottle they'd filled those flutes with? Wexspring. My holding company had acquired it through a double-blind purchase last year. The family toasting their legacy was drinking my equity. The phone in my pocket buzzed. I didn't rush. I pulled it out smoothly, already guessing what it would say. Kara again. The deal's been fast-tracked. $8 billion. You'll need to sign in person. Helicopter will be there in 15. $8 billion. I read the number again, not because I didn't believe it, but because it felt unreal in contrast to the cheap theatrics playing out inside. I looked up at the glass, at Bryce, mid-speech now, probably talking about grit or grit-adjacent nonsense. The same man who once asked me for help transferring files from his laptop to his assistant's drive. The man who said, "I don't really get how you make money on the internet, but hey, someone has to do the boring stuff." Elise laughed, clapping delicately. Delilah leaned into Bryce's arm like she'd just found the winning side of history. I took another sip of my water. The night air had a bite to it, crisp and clean. You could hear the faint hum of tires on the road beyond the trees. Somewhere nearby, someone lit a cigar. The patio was quiet, and I liked it that way. The silence out here had a texture, a rhythm. Inside, their noise sounded like static, glossy, practiced, predictable. I opened a secure app on my phone and scanned the contract Kara had flagged. The legal language was airtight. Acquisition of Voltmine Labs. Seamless integration into Phoenix's AI division. The future had just accelerated. With this deal, Phoenix Tech would leapfrog 2 years of R&D. We'd own the platform that every autonomous system from London to Tokyo would run on by the end of Q2. And I was sitting here on a patio. I signed digitally and sent the authorization with one tap. A small green checkmark blinked on the screen. Done. 1,000 hands would move behind the scenes now, lawyers, brokers, operations leads. Like gears turning without friction. All it had taken was one nudge from me. Behind the glass, Bryce had finished his toast. Everyone raised their flutes. Mom wiped a tear, probably because he'd mentioned Dad or maybe told a rehearsed story about family vacations. The camera flashes started. Elise posed with Bryce. Dad chuckled. Delilah tilted her head at just the right angle, lips curled in a designer-approved smile. They toasted. I closed the app and stood up. I didn't feel anger. Not the hot, roaring kind. What I felt was colder. Cleaner. Like glass. This wasn't revenge. This was reveal. A moment suspended between what they thought they knew and what they were about to learn. My phone buzzed again. James. On site. Heli touching down in 5. East Lawn. I texted back. Bring 2. I want one visible. Let them see it. Let them hear it. Because now, the story was shifting. I stood at the edge of the patio, hands in my coat pockets, watching the golden people live their golden lie a little longer. That world had no place for me. That world thought I was a whisper, a side note, a ghost. But they forgot. Ghosts don't fade. They linger. They wait. And sometimes, they come back with power. In 5 minutes, the thrum of rotor blades would fill the night sky. And for the first time, they'd look through the glass and see me not as the brother on the patio, but as the man who owned the damn sky. It started as a low hum, barely audible over the clatter of champagne flutes and the dull murmur of self-satisfaction radiating from inside the banquet hall. At first, no one paid it any attention. Why would they? The Sterling Country Club was their kingdom of comfort, and nothing unexpected ever touched the perimeter of their carefully curated lives. But I heard it, felt it, actually, like a pulse in the floor, a vibration traveling through stone and steel. I turned slightly in my seat, scanning the far end of the lawn just beyond the patio's decorative railing. The sound deepened, shifted, became undeniable. From my place in exile, I watched it unfold like a scene I'd choreographed years ago, an inevitability disguised as surprise. Delilah was the first to react, her hand pausing midair as she reached for another flute. She squinted through the French doors, brows tightening. Then Elise followed, her smile faltering just enough to show a crack. She stepped closer to the glass, her heels clicking across the marble floor with a rhythm too deliberate to be calm. Is someone landing? Here? Elise asked aloud, though it was more of a gasp than a question. Bryce, ever the peacock, chuckled. Probably someone important, he said, with that smirk he'd perfected over the years, the one that told people he believed the world was his front lawn and everyone else was a guest. The glass began to rattle, gently at first, then with the subtle tremble of power made manifest. The chandelier overhead flickered once, as if acknowledging the moment. The hum became a roar. People turned their heads. Conversations dropped mid-sentence. Even my father, who rarely looked up from his scotch anymore, tilted his chin toward the noise. And then they saw it. Descending from the darkening sky like a black arrow dipped in silence and speed, the helicopter cut through the air with clinical precision. Sleek. Matte. No gloss. No frills, just purpose. On the side, stenciled in minimalist white, Phoenix Tech Group. No mistaking it. No denying it. The symbol of the company I built from dorm room circuitry and after-hours code now hovered 30 feet above their heads like a truth they had no armor for. The downdraft from the rotors whipped at tablecloths and centerpieces. Napkins flew. Elise's meticulously styled hair lifted like a warning flag. Delilah flinched, covering her face with her arm. Glasses tipped. Silverware chimed in nervous harmony. Staff scrambled. Guests murmured. All eyes turned to the source of disruption. And then James stepped out. Tailored black suit. Dark sunglasses. An earpiece he didn't need but wore for effect. Behind him, 2 more members of my operations team disembarked, each one a signal of something that didn't belong in their world of catered shrimp and manufactured smiles. They didn't head to the club entrance. They didn't glance at the marquee, or the gift table, or the crowd forming around the confusion. They walked directly to me. To the patio. To the chair they'd assigned me like an afterthought. James reached my table with the grace of a man who could silence a room just by existing in it. He removed his sunglasses and offered a single nod. "Mr. Wexler," he said, voice crisp above the hum, "the board is waiting." I rose without a word, slipping my phone into my coat pocket. I didn't need a dramatic pause. I didn't need to look back at the glass doors. But I did, for just a second. Just enough to catch the moment Bryce's brain short-circuited. His mouth opened. No words came out. Delilah stared at me like I'd stepped out of a hallucination. Elise's fingers gripped the edge of her clutch so tightly I thought it might split. My mother stood frozen, lips parted slightly, eyes darting between me and the helicopter like she'd suddenly forgotten how to read. This wasn't a scene they were equipped to process. I didn't belong in this frame, not the way they'd drawn it. I was the quiet one, the seat filler, the family courtesy. And yet here I was, being summoned from the shadows by people in suits who didn't know or care who my brother was. I wasn't a plus one. I was the asset. James gestured toward the path leading from the patio to the helipad on the lawn. "We'll need to depart in 2 minutes if we want to catch the Tokyo pre-market window." I adjusted the cuff of my jacket. Calm. Measured. Like I did this every day. Because I did. Then I walked. The lawn parted before me like it was made to. The sound of the blades above softened just enough to let the moment breathe. Guest whispered. Phones rose discreetly. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. Everything about this was deliberate. From the lettering on the chopper to the placement of the landing. Just visible enough to turn heads. Just loud enough to break egos. As I reached the aircraft, the side door opened, and the interior lights flickered to life, cool, sleek, glowing like the future. I paused at the step, then turned to glance once more at the building. Through the doors, the party still glittered. But the laughter was gone. The illusion cracked. Bryce stood there with a glass dangling from his hand, forgotten. Elise didn't blink. Delilah, ever the one to hide poison behind perfume, looked like she'd swallowed her own script. And my father, stoic, quiet, still clutching that scotch, finally looked at me. Really looked. Recognition, disbelief, and something like respect. Or maybe regret. For once, I didn't care. Because they had built their image on noise, on optics, on being seen. I had built something else entirely. James touched my shoulder. Boardroom in 27 minutes. We'll land on the Midtown roof. I climbed into the helicopter. No words. No goodbyes. Just forward motion. I didn't even make it 3 steps before the glass doors flung open behind me. The sound was sharp, too loud for polite company, and carried across the patio like a gunshot at a symphony. Delilah's heels clicked against the stone as she stormed toward me, her dress fluttering behind her like some wounded banner. "Wait," she called, her voice high and shrill, already fraying at the edges. I didn't slow down. I didn't turn. But James did. He stepped between us with calm precision, his frame blocking her path like a drawn curtain. Delilah's eyes were wide, panicked, confused. "What is this?" she demanded, looking at James like he'd torn open a dream. "Where do you think you're taking him?" James didn't flinch. "CEO Emergency Extraction Protocol," he said, tone flat and unbothered. "Mr. Wexler has an $8 billion deal to close." And just like that, it dropped. Bryce stepped out next, right behind her, his face already cracking. He looked like he'd just emerged from a fog, one built over years of being told he was the most important man in any room. The man who thought tech meant fixing Wi-Fi and startup meant unemployed with flair. His jaw slackened, and for once, he had no line to throw, no smirk to shield him. The glass in his hand slipped, tumbled, shattered at his feet. The sound echoed, crisp and final, like a bell tolling for the illusion he'd lived in. "You?" he finally choked out, voice hoarse like he hadn't used it in weeks. I stopped, turned to face him fully. "Yes," I said quietly. "Me." The computer thing turned out okay. Behind him, more guests had wandered out, drawn by the sound and the spectacle. Elise stood just inside the threshold, her expression caught somewhere between horror and fascination. Mom looked pale, one hand hovering near her collarbone like she'd just remembered how hearts work. Then Dad appeared. He stepped forward slowly, deliberately, like he didn't quite believe his own feet. His eyes found mine, not the glance of a father checking on a child, but the stare of a man realizing he misread an entire lifetime. "Your company?" he asked, voice hollow with disbelief. "Phoenix Tech Group," I replied, keeping it clean, keeping it direct. "You've probably seen it in the business pages. We've been acquiring startups and entire AI firms across Europe for the past 3 years. Just closed a deal last quarter that made us the most dominant infrastructure backbone for autonomous logistics in the Eastern Corridor. You know, trucks, drones, smart freight. Everything your generation said wouldn't work. He blinked, and I kept going. And since we're all sharing surprises tonight, Bryce, I bought your real estate firm last month through a holding entity, consolidated your operations, eliminated your overhead, and replaced your VP of sales with an algorithm. You're technically still employed, for now. But if you're wondering why HR suddenly started asking for performance metrics, well, now you know. Bryce didn't move, didn't speak. His world was a glass tower, and I just pulled out the rebar. He looked down at the broken shards at his feet, like they might rearrange themselves into a map out of this moment. Silence swelled between us, stretching wide and taut. The guests shifted uneasily. A woman whispered, "Phoenix Tech, that's him?" Another murmured something about Forbes, about the cover last spring. And I just stood there, letting it wash over them. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was stillness, like the moment a storm breaks and everything hangs in suspension, waiting for the next breath. James cleared his throat softly. "Sir, we'll need to lift in 5 if we want to meet Tokyo's Open." I nodded, then glanced one last time at the people I had once called family. They weren't villains. Not really. They were just predictable. And that's what made it easy. They underestimated me not because I failed them, but because I refused to play their game. I didn't show up in silk ties or make loud speeches at dinner. I didn't marry for optics or throw money at parties to prove I had it. I built my life in silence, in the long hours, in the code and contracts and quiet decisions that don't make headlines until they reshape the world. You built your image on status, I said, voice even. I built substance. You toasted to legacy. I built one. Delilah opened her mouth again, maybe to argue, maybe to apologize, but nothing came out. Too late. James motioned toward the aircraft. I turned, walking the final steps toward it, the cool wind from the rotors pressing against my back like a hand guiding me forward. I stepped inside without ceremony. No dramatic glance. No wink. Just purpose. As the cabin door closed, I caught one last glimpse through the reinforced window, Bryce still frozen in place, Delilah's face pale as porcelain, Elise blinking too fast, and my mother staring like she'd swallowed her pearls whole. The cabin sealed. The noise became a dull hum, then a roar as we lifted. No applause. No farewell. Only altitude. And clarity. "You own my company?" Bryce's voice cracked like cheap glass under pressure, but I wasn't surprised. He'd never heard himself sound small before. And now, hearing the words out loud, words he could neither unsay nor unhear, was like watching a balloon deflate in slow motion. "I can," I said quietly, meeting his stare without flinching. And I did. His mouth opened again, but no words came out. For once, all that arrogance, all that practiced bravado, failed him. Elise stood just behind him, her expression still suspended in a tightrope between denial and dawning horror. Her eyes kept darting between my face and the helicopter behind me, like she thought she might be able to blink away the moment. Delilah, usually sharp-tongued and quick with a backhanded comment, simply whispered, "So, he's not a failure?" The way she said it wasn't a question, it was an admission. A reality cracking through the polished surface of every lie they'd built about me. James, professional as always, stepped forward, his presence like a clock reminding them that the world was still moving even if they weren't. "Mr. Wexler, we need your authorization. The Asian markets open in 3 hours, and our window is tight." I nodded once, calmly. The hum of the helicopter behind me was a steady reminder that the rest of the world, my world, was waiting. Real deals. Real influence. Real consequences. Still, I paused. For just a second. Not out of sentimentality. Not for them. But to mark the moment properly. They needed to feel this. The stillness, the shift, the reality that had always existed just beyond their willful ignorance. I turned to face them, fully and without apology. You all built your image on being seen. On who clapped the loudest at your parties, who tagged who in some gala photo, who got the mayor to smile at a brunch. And you know what? That's fine. That's your world. But while you toasted yourselves, I was building something that didn't need applause. I built in silence. In the late hours. In rooms that didn't serve hors d'oeuvres or seat you based on last names. My eyes moved from Bryce to Elise. You toasted to legacy tonight. You poured expensive wine and clinked glasses for it. But I didn't toast. I didn't raise my glass. I was too busy building mine. Delilah took a tiny step back, as if the words themselves carried weight. Elise blinked, slow and stunned. "We should have been nicer," she murmured, mostly to herself. The sincerity in her voice was almost touching, if it hadn't been laced with decades of performative kindness that never quite reached the core. Too late. Bryce finally found his voice again, though it came out too fast, too forced. Logan, listen, look, maybe we got off track. But this could be an opportunity. Imagine combining our firms. Your tech, my real estate. Think of what we could do. It was almost impressive how fast he pivoted from disbelief to partnership pitch. Classic Bryce. Talk over reality, offer a handshake soaked in desperation, pretend none of it ever happened. I let him dangle in that hopeful silence for a breath, then shook my head gently. I didn't build Phoenix to rescue your pride. He winced. From the corner of my eye, I could see my mother still frozen in place. She hadn't spoken once. Her silence felt heavy, not out of wisdom, but confusion. Like a machine trying to recalculate after years of using the wrong input. James lifted his tablet. Mr. Wexler? I took one last glance at them. My family, my audience, the people who never really saw me until now. The kind of people who mistook quiet for weakness and substance for decoration. I turned, stepped toward the helicopter again, and as I climbed in, I said it without turning back. Send me your invoices if you need a refund on the patio chair. I won't be using it again. The cabin door slid shut behind me with a satisfying hiss. Inside, the quiet was immediate, pristine. James handed me the tablet, and I signed the authorization for the transfer of assets. One swipe. That's all it took to close a deal worth more than anything Bryce would touch in his lifetime. James nodded in approval. Phoenix now owns the VoltMind infrastructure. Integration begins at midnight. Make sure the European teams get the revised encryption packet, I said. No leaks. No lag. He tapped a note into his device. Already done. The helicopter lifted again, climbing smoothly into the skyline. Below, the party was still frozen in glass. The people who always thought they were at the top had just learned there was another floor above them, one they never even noticed. I leaned back in my seat, staring out the window as the lights of the country club shrank beneath us. For the first time that night, I felt the tension slide from my shoulders. Not relief, something cooler. Satisfaction, maybe. Or clarity. They would talk, of course. The group chats would light up. Elise would call someone and try to understand what just happened. Bryce would stomp around and pretend he was owed something. Delilah would spin a new story to soften the blow. But it wouldn't matter. Because now they knew. And there's no one knowing that kind of truth. The next morning, my phone lit up before the sun even cleared the horizon. I hadn't even left the penthouse yet. I was still sitting on the edge of my bed, one foot on the hardwood, sipping black coffee from a heavy ceramic mug when the buzz started. First Bryce. Then Elise. Then Delilah. Each message like a ripple hitting the surface of calm water, pathetic, predictable. Bryce's message was the first one to make me laugh out loud. Let's partner up. Imagine combining our companies, tech and real estate. A legacy move. Legacy. That word again. They were obsessed with it. As if repeating it would magically make them part of one. He didn't reference the previous night, didn't mention the shattered glass or the shock in his voice when I dropped the truth. Just pivoted, like nothing had happened. Like the world hadn't turned upside down on him while his glass dripped into his shoes. Next came Elise. You've always been the smart one. Lo, let's catch up soon. I'd love to hear more about what you're working on. It was the kind of message that sounds innocent to outsiders, but, to me, read like the beginning of a PR recovery campaign. Elise didn't reach out unless she needed something. And right now, she needed proximity. It wasn't admiration, it was strategy. Delilah didn't bother with subtlety. A Dior-branded box showed up at the concierge desk, wrapped in matte black paper and tied with a gold ribbon. Inside, a cashmere scarf and a note scribbled in hurried cursive. Hope you're staying warm now that everyone sees you. She always had a way with words. Even her apologies came dressed in compliments she could deny later. Then came the voicemail from Mom. I played it once and then played it again just to make sure I hadn't imagined the tone. Logan, darling, she began, overly sweet. About that patio, total misunderstanding. We just thought you'd prefer something quiet. You know how your father gets around crowds. We never meant to isolate you. You know that, don't you? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I saved the voicemail under a new folder in my email, patio apologies. I added the others there too. All of them. Bryce's pitch, Elise's soft re-entry, Delilah's rapt regret. I wanted to keep them. Not for revenge. Not to hold over anyone's head. Just as evidence. Proof that power doesn't change people, it reveals them. While they tried to spin the story, the rest of the world already had mine. On the cover of Wired, framed in bright, clean letters, was a photo of me exiting the helicopter in front of Sterling Country Club. The image was grainy but perfect. A silhouette of Calm walking toward the chopper while startled guests behind the glass looked like museum pieces stuck in their frame. The quiet tech giant. Logan Wexler's billion-dollar play. The article had gone live at 5 a.m. By 7, it had been picked up by 5 outlets. By 9, my publicist called to say the journal wanted an exclusive follow-up. It wasn't the first time I'd been profiled. But it was the first time they knew who I was without needing a search bar. The real game changer wasn't the magazine or the media storm. It was the calls. Overnight, investment firms who used to pass on Phoenix without returning a call were sending messages through intermediaries, asking for time, pleading for a seat at the next roundtable. CEOs I once pitched to, who had respectfully declined because they weren't sure the timing was right, were now scrambling to secure joint ventures. The irony didn't escape me. The moment I stopped asking for a seat at their table, they started building a new one around mine. By noon, I was on the 58th floor of Phoenix HQ, leaning against the edge of the boardroom window while Kara updated the rest of the executive team. Her voice was crisp, her focus absolute. She was already lining up the next acquisition, something in the biotech automation sector. Once Voltmine's systems are integrated, we'll have bandwidth to expand into surgical AI, she said. James is building the back-end structure. I nodded, only half listening. My mind drifted back to the country club, to the perfect symmetry of their lives cracking, just a little, under the weight of what they hadn't seen coming. No anger, no bitterness, just a kind of clinical satisfaction. I hadn't needed to raise my voice. I hadn't needed to outshine them. I just let the truth land like gravity. Later that afternoon, as I walked through the lobby of my building, one of the doormen handed me a thick envelope, embossed with Sterling Country Club's gold insignia, sealed in wax like it was 1812. I opened it slowly, scanning the contents. It was a formal invitation, a dinner, a gathering to honor family and unity. My name was at the top of the guest list, not scribbled in last or tucked to the side. Bold, first, centered. They'd finally built a table with me at the head. I smiled and handed the invitation back to the doorman. File it under maybe, I said. Upstairs, I placed the scarf Delilah had sent in the back of my closet. The voicemail from Mom I never returned. Elise's message I left on read. Bryce's proposal went straight to legal for review, not because I was interested, but because I wanted him to wait. Let him think the door was cracked. Let him feel what it was like to knock and hear nothing from the other side. Success didn't need to be loud. It didn't need glitter or gold-framed announcements. It just needed to be clear. And now it was. They had written me off. Now, I was rewriting everything. It didn't take long after the Wired cover hit before the idea came to me. Not out of revenge. Not even spite. It was something deeper than that. A kind of still justice, slow and deliberate. The kind you don't need to announce, because the weight of it settles naturally. I picked up the phone one quiet Thursday evening while the city outside my window blinked in golden grids. I didn't ask questions. I gave orders. Put in an offer on the Sterling Country Club, I said, my voice even. There was a pause on the other end of the line. No fanfare, I added. Keep Phoenix's name out of it. You shell entities. We're not making noise. Not yet. The next morning, the legal TE. 2 weeks later, I got the call. Sterling Estate Holdings has accepted the offer. Escrow will close next Tuesday. Congratulations, Mr. Wexler. I didn't smile. I didn't lean back or clench my fists in some movie-style celebration. I just said, good, and ended the call. It was done. The same building where they'd exiled me to the patio now belonged to me. Not just the room. Not just the table. The whole thing. The marble lobby. The manicured lawn. The tennis courts no one used but loved to brag about. The French doors. The chandeliers. The stone path where I stood under rotor blades and rewrote every lie they'd ever told about me. The next part was easy. We had the sign replaced first, just a minor cosmetic update. Where the entrance used to say Sterling Country Club, in curling gold script above the wrought iron gate, it now read, Sterling Country Club, a Phoenix property. And below that, in newer, sleeker font, owned by Logan Wexler. We didn't hold a ceremony. There was no ribbon cutting. I didn't want cameras or news anchors with fake laughs pretending they understood what the moment meant. I wanted them to see it slowly. To drive past it one day, maybe running late for lunch, and notice something was off. Maybe they'd think, huh, that looks different, and then realize, in the pit of their stomach, that the air had shifted. I walked the halls of the building on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, flanked by a couple of Phoenix property consultants who'd been tasked with reviewing the floor plans. Everything still looked the same. The chairs, the bar, even the polished oak dance floor in the ballroom that hadn't changed since Bryce's wedding reception. But it wasn't the same, because this time, my name wasn't on a seating chart. It was on the deed. I reached the patio door and pushed it open, stepped out into the same open air where I'd once been sent like some family inconvenience. The chair was still there, wobbly as ever. I laughed under my breath. They hadn't even bothered to replace it after I left. Probably thought I wouldn't be back. One of the consultants caught up with me. "Mr. Wexler, would you like us to rework the patio into an event space?" I turned, looked at the spot where I'd sat with a glass of water, overlooked and uninvited. "No," I said. "We're keeping the patio. But from now on, no one eats out here because they weren't good enough to sit inside." She frowned slightly. "So, a change in seating policy?" "Exactly. No patio seating unless requested. Every table is a table of power. No more side exile." She nodded and scribbled it down. Later that evening, word started trickling through the circles. First, the club regulars noticed the new signage. Then someone from Elise's circle forwarded the name change. By nightfall, Bryce had called me 3 times. I didn't answer. Elise texted, "Did you actually buy the club?" Followed by a second message, "Please tell me that's not real." I didn't reply. Delilah posted a photo of herself standing next to the new logo on Instagram with a carefully vague caption, "When the past and the future share an address." The comment section was a minefield of speculation. Some guessed I was renting a suite there. Others guessed correctly, but none of them knew what it felt like to hold the keys. It was the next morning when the Real poetry hit. Apparently, Delilah fainted when she saw her new member invoice addressed from Wexler Sterling Holdings. Elise called the front desk to demand clarification. Bryce showed up unannounced, marching through the lobby, demanding to speak with whoever approved this nonsense. The receptionist calmly handed him a folder. Inside, a simple letter, printed on Phoenix letterhead. "Dear Mr. Wexler, we appreciate your longtime patronage of the Sterling Country Club. As part of our ongoing improvements, we've made some minor ownership and policy changes. Please note that all future seating requests will be handled with discretion and respect. Logan Wexler, owner." They hadn't been prepared for that. Bryce tried calling again. I watched the phone ring from my desk at Phoenix HQ, watched the name flash on the screen and fade to voicemail. I didn't reject the call. I let it die naturally. That was the difference now. I didn't have to say no. My silence said it for me. They had all spent years defining power as noise, volume, flash, curated visibility. But I knew what it really looked like. Power is calm. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't ask for recognition. It buys the room and lets everyone else figure it out later. That night, I walked through the club again. Same walls, same tables. But now, every inch of it answered to me. And the patio? That was no longer punishment. It was history. It was the beginning. The invitation came in the form of cream-colored cardstock with gold trim and an overly formal header. A family reconciliation dinner. As if branding the evening like a corporate gala would somehow wipe away everything that had already been done. I didn't need to open it to know who sent it. Elise always preferred paper when she wanted to manipulate a narrative. Digital was too casual, too traceable. She liked the permanence of ink when rewriting family history. I left the envelope sitting unopened on the kitchen island for 3 days. I didn't touch it, didn't even move it when the cleaning crew came through. It sat there like a relic of a different era, a fossil of a family dynamic that no longer existed. But on the 4th morning, I finally slid it open with the flat edge of a letter opener and read the words inside. They had gone all out. Private chef, live quartet, candlelight seating for 12. Sterling Country Club, of course. Elise must have reserved the main dining room, which now, ironically, belonged to me. Dad's name was listed at the bottom in shaky cursive. "Looking forward to seeing you there, Dad." It was the first time I'd seen his name on something that wasn't passive-aggressive or condescending in years. Someone, probably Elise, had convinced him this would fix everything. That one dinner could erase years of marginalization, of patio chairs and sideways glances, of being ignored until my value was no longer optional. The absurdity of it made me laugh. Not bitterly, just honestly. They thought this was their comeback scene. The grand finale where they stood in a photo smiling, arms around each other, like the world hadn't just realigned. I didn't RSVP. I didn't send regrets. I sent nothing. They followed up, of course. Elise first, texting twice. Elise, dinner's confirmed for Thursday. You'll be at the head of the table, of course. Elise, again, let me know if you have dietary restrictions. We're doing a French-Italian fusion tasting menu. As if seating me at the head would fix where they'd placed me for 70 years. As if fusion cuisine could blend betrayal and amnesia into something palatable. Bryce sent a voice note that was clearly rehearsed. He started off trying to sound casual, called me bro twice, then shifted tone halfway through and leaned into sincerity like he'd studied it the night before. Look, Logan, I know things got messy. Emotions ran high. We're all just trying to do right by Dad. Can we start fresh? No egos. Just family. He really said no egos. Bryce, the man who once had his initials embroidered on his dinner napkins. Delilah didn't message me directly, but I saw the post. A carefully lit photo of the private dining room being set up, candles and tall glass columns, name cards and gold script, a quote caption beneath it. Sometimes all a family needs is a shared meal and an open heart. The comment section was filled with faux sympathy and emojis of wine glasses and hearts. The only thing missing was me, which, ironically, was the most honest thing about it. That Thursday, while they dressed in designer suits and carefully selected forgiveness outfits, I sat in my office, 62 stories above the city. The skyline stretched around me like a painting, cool blues, reflective glass, endless light. The floor was quiet, just the faint hum of servers and the occasional knock from James or Kara. I liked it that way. I didn't need music to set a mood. The numbers on my dashboard did that just fine. At exactly 7:02 p.m., my assistant knocked once and stepped in. They're all there, she said, without needing to say who. Dinner's plated. They even printed your name at the head of the table. Calligraphy and everything. I set down my glass of water. No champagne. No red wine. Just the same bottled water I drank on the patio that night. Wex Spring, labeled and cold. Did they? I said. How generous. She offered a sympathetic smile. Would you like me to send your regrets? No, I said. I've got something better. I tapped my tablet, opened the signed PDF, and forwarded it to her inbox. Attach this to an email. Subject line, board meeting conflict. Body, apologies, unable to attend. Please see attached for something that actually matters. Then send it to Elise, Bryce, and Delilah. CC Mom and Dad. She raised her eyebrows when she saw the attachment. This is your acquisition contract. Yes, I said, standing and buttoning my blazer. I just finalized the merger with Graphinex. Our AI division is about to leap 3 years forward. She nodded. Understood. I walked to the window as she stepped out. The city below was glittering endless. Somewhere, my family was raising glasses, toasting to revisionist history. Maybe Dad had made a speech. Maybe they had left my chair empty on purpose, hoping I'd walk in at the last moment for dramatic effect. That was Elise's style. Cinematic. Glossy. Empty. At 7:23, my phone buzzed. Elise, got your email. That was something. Maybe next time, Logan. I stared at the screen. Maybe next time. I typed slowly, deliberately. Me, next quarter. Maybe. If the patio's free. Then I put the phone down and returned to my desk. I had 3 more meetings lined up before the Tokyo session opened. One was with a biotech firm in Zurich. The other, a telecom investor who used to ignore my calls. Now he wanted exclusivity. Funny how that worked. I didn't hate them, not anymore. What would be the point? They'd done what came naturally, dismissed the quiet one, clung to the loud ones. It wasn't evil. It was just easy. But ease doesn't build empires. It seats you at patios. It clinks glasses while your name is forgotten. And then it looks up one day and realizes the view has changed, and so has the man they overlooked. Back at the club, I imagined the dinner dragging on, the wine getting warmer, the food plated perfectly but eaten distractedly. No one asking the real question aloud. Why didn't he come? They knew why. They just didn't want to hear it out loud. They wanted absolution without accountability. But I wasn't a priest. I was the one they tried to edit out of the story, and now I owned the publishing rights. Let them have their meal. Let them have their candlelight apologies and curated guilt. I had something better. I had control, and peace, and the power to decide exactly when, and if I ever sat at their table again. The view stretched beyond the skyline, beyond steel and glass, beyond what they ever imagined I'd touch. I sat in my office on the 62nd floor of Phoenix Tower, a wall of windows behind me and the city sprawled below like a map I'd drawn myself. The sun was just starting to sink, staining the sky in layers of orange and soft gold, as if the horizon had decided to applaud me silently. That light soaked into everything, the gleam of my desk, the polished edge of the conference table behind me, the subtle glow on the single-framed photograph mounted on the wall. It was the only personal item I kept in the room. Just one. A photo taken from a phone that night at the Sterling Country Club, unposed, grainy, imperfect. In it, I was seated alone on the patio, water glass in hand, head tilted as if listening to some distant truth only I could hear. Inside the glass doors, my family shimmered like a mirage. Bryce mid-toast. Elise reaching for a canopy. Delilah's chin tipped just high enough to betray the confidence she clung to. They were behind the glass, warm, golden, blurry. I was clear, centered, cold. Below the photo was a small engraved plaque. Just 6 words. The view from failure. It had started as a joke, an inside reference only I would understand, but with time, it became something else. A milestone. A reminder. That night didn't break me. It revealed me. A knock tapped at the door, 2 short raps. "Come in," I said, not looking away from the photo. James stepped in, as crisp as ever, holding a tablet in one hand and a folded envelope in the other. "Your 7 p.m. board debrief is ready." And he held out the envelope. "The country club has made a formal request." I turned toward him slowly. "What kind of request?" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that knew its own punchline. "They'd like to host your gala next month. The new board members want to recognize Phoenix's latest acquisition. The mayor will be in attendance. Media coverage already lined up." I raised an eyebrow. "They're asking me to celebrate me. In the building they wouldn't let me sit in." "Correct," he said. I took the envelope and opened it. Inside, thick embossed cardstock, another formal invitation, this one dressed in reverence. The Sterling Gala, a night of innovation and legacy. There was my name at the top. The honoree. Phoenix's logo printed along the bottom margin. Not hidden, not veiled. Prominent. Proud. "How generous," I murmured, setting it down. James adjusted the cuffs of his sleeves. "They also requested permission to rename the main dining hall in your honor. Apparently, they want to call it the Wexler Room." I looked out the window again, eyes skimming the skyline. It was all there now: contracts, power, silence redefined. But something in me paused. "No," I said, turning back to him. "Tell them to rename the entire main hall." He didn't blink. "To what?" I stood, walking to the window. The city glimmered beneath me, cars like moving dots, buildings catching the last rays of dusk. I took a breath, then answered simply. "Wexler Hall." Because names mattered. Because when people entered that space now, I wanted them to remember. I wanted them to see it carved into the wall, stamped into the invitations, spoken aloud without hesitation. No longer a side guest. No longer the afterthought on a guest list. Not a rumor. Not a ghost. James nodded once and made a note on his tablet. He didn't need elaboration. He understood. I walked toward the photo again, hands in my pockets. There was something poetic about its placement. I could have surrounded myself with awards, features, headlines. Instead, I chose that night, that chair, that view. Because success wasn't loud. It wasn't wrapped in applause or posted for likes. It was the steady reclaiming of space. The quiet ownership of rooms that once tried to spit you out. They didn't know it then, but when they sent me to the patio, they gave me the clearest view of who they really were and who I really was. Everything changed after that night. After I left them standing in their own reflections, scrambling to rewrite the narrative. Bryce stepped down from his firm 3 weeks later. Publicly, he said it was to pursue new ventures. Privately, I knew he didn't want to work under the shadow of someone he used to mock. Elise pivoted to social commentary, launching a podcast on redefining influence, which was mostly a string of apologies wrapped in quotes she'd pulled from books she hadn't read. Delilah started tagging me in curated Instagram posts again, always captioned with something like, "Some journeys are quieter than others." She wanted to be adjacent to me again. Mom sent a handwritten letter. It came in a thick white envelope with a return address I hadn't seen in years. Inside, her usual cursive, tighter than I remembered, but still elegant. She wrote about family, about misunderstanding, about pride and guilt, and how her heart ached when she realized she hadn't protected the quiet one enough. The irony nearly made me laugh. I didn't respond. There was nothing cruel in the silence I returned. Just clarity. Some things deserve closure. Others deserve distance. The next morning, Kara joined me in the conference room. We were preparing to finalize the global expansion timeline. Phoenix was now stretching into 6 more countries, with 3 more regional HQs being scouted. She placed the updated figures on the table and said, "We've outpaced projected revenue by 11.6%. You're on every major index now. Keep the growth clean," I said. No noise. No victory laps. She smirked. "That's why we win." After the meeting, I walked the halls of Phoenix Tower, nodding at familiar faces. Some were new, wide-eyed interns who barely knew the story. Others were veterans who'd been there since the first server racks were stacked in a converted garage space outside Seattle. They didn't treat me like royalty. They treated me like something better, like consistency. When I returned to my office, the sun had fully set. The city below was glowing now, a sea of light and ambition. I sat back in my chair, hands resting on the armrests, and stared out at everything I'd built. There were no voices, no noise, just presence. I thought again of that old patio chair, wobbling slightly on stone, overlooked, unstable. And yet, somehow, that was the moment everything balanced. They had placed me outside thinking they were pushing me down. But they didn't know. That was the launch pad, the elevation, the point of no return. And now, when they walked into Sterling, they walked into my story. When they lifted glasses in Wexler Hall, they toasted in the room of the man they once ghosted. When they talked about legacy, they had to say my name first. That was the difference. That was the view now. Not from the head of their table, but from mine. And the air here? It was clear, sharp, owned.